Hey guys, tonight we wander slowly into a world where the rules never quite left. They just got quieter. You're standing on a narrow medieval street, the stones uneven beneath your feet, the air cool with that faint mix of wood smoke and something baking far away. A bell rings somewhere in the distance, soft but firm, like it expects to be obeyed. And as you look around, you start to realize these people aren't just living here. They're following rules you still follow today. Just with fewer smartphones and significantly more wool. Honestly, if you stayed here for a week, you'd probably forget your password, miss your bedtime, and get politely told off by someone holding a candle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow step forward, and the street narrows just a little more, as if guiding you somewhere specific without quite telling you where. The bell rings again, slightly louder this time, and you notice something curious. People are starting to move with purpose. Doors creak open, then shut. A window above you closes with a soft wooden knock. This is the curfew bell. Historians widely agree that medieval cities often enforced curfews, especially after dark. When the bell rang, it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a signal. Fires were to be covered, movement reduced, and in many places people were expected to stay indoors. You pause, glancing at the sky. It's not fully dark yet, just that gentle blue-grey moment when day hasn't quite let go, and yet the atmosphere has already shifted. Quieter, more contained. There's something oddly familiar about it. Because even now, in modern life, you still follow versions of this. Shops close, public transport slows, streets empty. Not because a bell told you to, but because the rhythm of life still leans toward rest after a certain hour. One lesser-known detail is that the word curfew itself comes from a phrase meaning cover the fire. In a time when open flames lit homes, this wasn't just about order, it was about safety. A city full of wooden buildings and unattended fires, well, that's a problem no one wants to wake up to. You imagine someone half asleep, reluctantly getting up to smother a fire, probably muttering something about how inconvenient safety can be. Some things really haven't changed. You walk a little further, and now the street feels almost empty. A lone figure passes by, carrying a lantern, its light flickering gently against the walls. Their footsteps are soft, measured, like they're aware of being slightly out of place. Maybe they have permission to be out. Maybe they're just hoping no one asks. Historians still debate how strictly these curfews were enforced across different cities. In some places, watchmen patrolled the streets, ensuring compliance. In others, enforcement may have been more relaxed, depending on local customs and resources. But the idea was there, the expectation, the understanding that after a certain point the day was done. You stop near a doorway, running your fingers lightly along the rough wood. It's cool to the touch, solid, reassuring. Inside, you can hear faint movement, someone settling in for the night, maybe arranging bedding, maybe finishing a quiet conversation. Life doesn't stop, it just softens. And as you stand there, you realize something subtle but important. Curfews weren't just about restriction, they were about rhythm. About giving structure to time in a world without glowing clocks or endless notifications. A shared understanding of when to be active and when to rest. You glance back down the street, now mostly empty, the last traces of movement fading into stillness. The bell has stopped ringing, but its presence lingers like a gentle reminder. Enough for today. You take a slow breath, the cool air settling around you, and begin to walk again, more quietly now, as if you, too, are part of this unspoken agreement. Because even without realizing it, you're already following the rule. You continue down the quiet street, still holding that gentle rhythm of the curfew in your steps, when the world begins to shift again, subtly at first, then with a bit more structure. The houses grow closer together, their wooden frames leaning slightly as if sharing secrets. A faint tapping sound reaches your ears, then another, then several, overlapping in a strangely comforting rhythm. Work is still happening here, carefully, quietly, but very much present. You turn a corner and find yourself standing in front of a workshop. The door is open just enough to let warm light spill out onto the street. Inside, a man in a russet tunic leans over a wooden bench, shaping something with slow, practiced movements. Nearby, another figure sorts tools with almost ceremonial precision. You've just stepped into the world of guilds. Historians widely agree that medieval guilds played a central role in organizing trades and professions. Blacksmiths, bakers, weavers, carpenters, each had their own guild, complete with rules about training, quality, pricing, and even behavior. You watch as the craftsman pauses, inspecting his work with a quiet seriousness that feels familiar. Because even now, modern jobs still carry echoes of this system. Certifications, training periods, professional standards, it's all there, just dressed in slightly less wool. You step a little closer, careful not to interrupt, and notice something interesting. Hanging on the wall are tools arranged in a very specific order, not just stored, displayed, almost like a quiet statement of identity. One lesser-known detail is that guild membership often defined a person's place in society. It wasn't just what you did, it was who you were, your craft, your reputation, your community, all tied together. No pressure or anything. You imagine introducing yourself like that. Hi, I'm a professional. Person who answers emails. It doesn't quite have the same weight, does it? The craftsman sets down his tool and reaches for another, moving with a rhythm that suggests years, decades of repetition. There's no rush, no sense of urgency, just a steady commitment to doing things properly. That word matters here. Properly. Guilds enforce strict standards. If you wanted to sell your goods, they had to meet certain expectations. Quality wasn't optional. It was monitored, inspected, and, if necessary, corrected. Historians still debate how fair these systems were. On one hand, they protected consumers and maintained craftsmanship. On the other, they could limit competition and make it difficult for outsiders to enter the trade. So yes, even in the Middle Ages, there were gatekeepers. Some things really do have a long history. You glance toward the back of the workshop and notice a younger apprentice carefully observing every movement. He doesn't speak much, just watches, occasionally mimicking a motion with hesitant precision. This is how skills were passed down, not through online tutorials or quick guides, but through years of observation, repetition, and, likely, a few quiet corrections along the way. You can almost hear the unspoken rule: watch closely, you'll understand eventually. It's oddly calming. No rush to master everything overnight, just a slow accumulation of skill, layer by layer. You step back out into the street, and now that you're looking for it, you notice more workshops. A baker arranging loaves in a window, a weaver adjusting threads on a loom, a cobbler tapping gently at a shoe, each one part of a larger system, each one following rules that, in some form, still exist. Certifications, apprenticeships, professional standards, even the idea of earning your place in a field. It all traces back in part to structures like these. You pause for a moment, watching the soft glow of lantern lights spill from each doorway. And you realize something quietly reassuring. These rules weren't just about control. They were about trust. About knowing that the bread you bought would be edible, that the shoes you wore wouldn't fall apart immediately, that the person making something for you knew what they were doing. A surprisingly comforting thought. You take another slow step forward, the tapping sounds fading gently behind you, replaced once again by the soft quiet of the night. And as you move on, you carry with you a subtle understanding that even now, in your own world of resumes and job titles and quiet expectations, you're still part of a guild, just without the official robe. You leave the soft glow of the workshops behind, the steady tapping of tools fading into the background, and as you walk, the street opens just a little wider. The night air feels cooler now, carrying with it a faint rustle of fabric and quiet conversation drifting from somewhere ahead. There's a small gathering. Not loud, not chaotic, just a few figures standing beneath a hanging lantern, their clothing catching the light in muted shades of indigo, saffron, and deep russet. At first it seems like nothing unusual, just people talking. But then you notice something subtle. Everyone is dressed, very carefully. Not extravagantly, not necessarily wealthy, but deliberately, as if each piece of clothing has been chosen with more than just comfort in mind. And in a way, it has. You step closer, blending quietly into the edge of the scene, and begin to understand that what you're seeing isn't just fashion, it's regulation. Historians widely agree that medieval societies enforced what are known as sumptuary laws, rules that dictated what people could and could not wear based on their social class, occupation, or status. Yes, there were actual laws about clothing. You glance down at a man adjusting his sleeve, the fabric a deep, rich blue. Nearby, another figure wears something simpler, more muted. No one crosses those invisible lines, because they're not just suggestions, they're expectations. One lesser-known detail is that certain colours and materials were restricted to specific groups. For example, luxurious fabrics like silk or certain dyes, especially vibrant ones, were often reserved for the wealthy or for nobility. So if you ever wondered why medieval peasants didn't just dress up a bit more, well, it's because they literally weren't allowed to. You imagine trying to explain modern fashion trends here. Actually, I just wear this oversized hoodie because it's comfortable. That would probably raise a few eyebrows, or at least a formal complaint. There's a quiet humour in it, though. Even today, dress codes still exist, just in softer forms. Workplace attire, formal events, school uniforms, subtle guidelines about what is appropriate depending on where you are. No one is arresting you for wearing the wrong colour, hopefully, but the idea remains. Clothing as a signal, as identity, as a way of quietly saying, this is who I am, or at least who I'm allowed to be. You watch as one woman smooths the edge of her garment, the fabric catching a hint of gold from the lantern. It's simple, but elegant within its limits, carefully balanced between expression and restriction, and that balance feels familiar. Historians still debate how strictly sumptuary laws were enforced in everyday life. Some records suggest they were taken seriously, especially in larger cities. Others hint that people occasionally bent the rules, adding a slightly brighter colour here, a finer thread there, just enough to feel a bit more themselves. A quiet rebellion, in fabric form. You can't help but respect that, because even within rules, people find ways to express something personal. You step slightly back, letting the scene settle into stillness again. The conversation continues, soft and unhurried, the lantern flickering gently above. And you realize something subtle but meaningful. These laws weren't just about control. They were about visibility, about making social order immediately recognizable, about ensuring that at a glance you knew where you stood and where others stood in relation to you. It's a bit like having your entire profile displayed without needing to scroll. You walk on, the gathering fading behind you, and the street narrows again. The night deepens, the quiet returning in soft layers. And as you move forward, you carry with you a gentle awareness that even now, in a world where you can technically wear almost anything, there are still quiet rules guiding your choices, subtle expectations, unspoken boundaries not enforced by law anymore, but still very much present. You drift away from the softly lit gathering, the quiet rules of clothing still lingering in your mind, when the street opens into something a little livelier. Not loud exactly, but busier, warmer. There's a low hum of voices, the gentle clatter of wooden surfaces, the faint scent of spices, bread, and something simmering slowly. You've arrived at the market. Even at this late hour, a few stalls remain open, lanterns casting pools of golden light over neatly arranged goods. Baskets of vegetables, small sacks of grain, cuts of meat carefully displayed, and loaves of bread stacked with quiet pride. You step closer, drawn by the calm rhythm of exchange. Coins pass from hand to hand, a nod here, a quiet word there. No raised voices, no haggling that turns dramatic, just a steady flow of everyday commerce. And yet, there's something structured about it, something controlled. Historians widely agree that medieval markets were heavily regulated. Prices, weights, measures, and quality were all subject to rules, often enforced by local authorities or guild representatives. Because trust, once again, mattered. You watch as a merchant carefully weighs a small portion of grain using a simple balance scale. The weights are precise, standardized, and handled with a kind of ritual seriousness. No guessing, no, close enough. You can almost imagine someone in the background quietly checking, that looks like exactly the right amount. Don't try anything clever. One lesser-known detail is that some towns employed officials specifically to inspect goods and ensure fair pricing. Bread, in particular, was closely monitored. There were even laws determining the size and cost of a loaf depending on grain prices. Yes, bread had rules, very serious rules. You glance at a stack of loaves nearby, each one slightly different in shape but clearly made within certain expectations. No wildly creative artisan sourdough experiments here, just consistency. Honestly, somewhere in history, someone probably tried to make an unusually shaped loaf and got a firm but polite "please don't." You move along the row of stalls, noticing how each merchant stays within their space. No one pushes outward, no one disrupts the flow. It's organized in a way that feels almost comforting, predictable, reliable, and that's the point. Historians still debate how strictly price controls were enforced across different regions. In some places, they were tightly regulated to prevent shortages or unfair practices. In others, enforcement may have been more flexible, depending on local conditions. But the intention remained consistent. Fairness. Or at least, a version of it. You pause at a stall where a woman in a saffron-coloured garment arranges herbs into small bundles, tying them neatly with twine. The scent is gentle, calming, something between mint and earth. She works with quiet focus, occasionally glancing up to greet a passerby with a soft nod. No rush, no urgency, just a steady, practiced rhythm, and it reminds you of something. Even now, in modern stores, there are still rules about pricing, labeling, quality control. You don't always see them, but they're there, working quietly in the background to keep things running smoothly. You trust that what you buy is what it claims to be. Most of the time, anyway. You step back slightly, taking in the entire market scene, the soft light, the careful exchanges, the unspoken agreements holding everything together. And you realize something subtle. These rules weren't just about preventing chaos. They were about creating calm, about making everyday life feel stable, even in a world that could be unpredictable in so many other ways. You glance once more at the scale, perfectly balanced, and there's something almost symbolic about it. Not just weight. Balance between buyer and seller, between fairness and control, between trust and verification. You take a slow breath, the scent of herbs and bread still lingering in the air, and begin to move on. The market fades behind you, its gentle order dissolving back into the quiet of the street, and as you walk, you carry with you a quiet realization that even now, in your own world of receipts and price tags, you're still standing in that market, just with brighter lights and slightly more packaging. You leave the warm glow of the market behind, the scent of herbs and bread slowly fading into the cooler night air, and the street narrows once more. The stones beneath your feet feel slightly damp now, reflecting the lantern light in soft, uneven patches. There's a faint trickle of water somewhere nearby. Not dramatic, not rushing, just present. You follow the sound, almost without thinking, and it leads you to a small open space where a stone basin sits against a wall. A wooden bucket rests beside it, worn smooth from years of use. A figure approaches, sleeves rolled slightly, and begins to wash their hands in quiet, practiced motions. No one rushes them, no one watches closely, but the act feels expected. This is where another set of rules quietly reveals itself. Hygiene. Historians widely agree that medieval towns, especially the larger ones, developed various regulations to manage cleanliness, though perhaps not always in the way you might imagine. There were rules about waste disposal, street cleaning, and access to water sources. Not exactly luxury spa standards, but not complete chaos either. You lean slightly closer, watching the water ripple as it's disturbed, catching the lantern light in soft gold patterns. The person finishes, dries their hands on a cloth, and steps away, making space for the next. It's a simple system, but it works. One lesser-known detail is that many cities had designated areas for waste and specific times when it could be removed. There were even rules about not throwing certain things into the street, rules that one suspects were occasionally ignored but still existed. You imagine someone standing at a window, considering their options and deciding, well, maybe just this once. Some habits, it seems, are quite persistent. You continue walking, and now you notice small details you might have missed before. A narrow channel running along the edge of the street, guiding water away. A bucket placed just outside a doorway. A cloth hanging to dry. Subtle signs of a system in place. Not perfect, but intentional. Historians still debate how effective these hygiene measures truly were. Some argue they significantly improved urban living conditions over time. Others point out that challenges remained, especially as cities grew more crowded, which feels relatable. Because even now, managing cleanliness in busy places is an ongoing effort. Trash collection schedules, sanitation rules, public health guidelines, they're all modern echoes of these earlier attempts to create order from everyday life. You pause near the basin, dipping your fingers lightly into the cool water. It's refreshing, grounding, a small moment of stillness. And you realize something quietly important. These rules weren't about perfection. They were about care, about maintaining a shared space in a way that made it livable for everyone, even if that meant occasional reminders or the medieval equivalent of a strongly worded notice. You smile slightly at the thought. Somewhere at some point, someone probably wrote a rule that essentially translated to, "Please stop doing that." And someone else probably ignored it. You straighten up, letting your hand fall back to your side, and take one last look at the basin. The water has settled again, smooth and reflective, as if nothing had disturbed it at all. A quiet reset. You turn and continue on, the sound of your footsteps soft against the damp stone, the night wrapping gently around you once more. And as you move forward, you carry with you a subtle awareness that even now, in your own routines of washing hands, tidying spaces, following small daily habits, you're part of this same long story. Not always perfect, but always trying in small ways to keep things just a little cleaner. You leave the quiet basin behind, the faint ripple of water settling into stillness, and as you continue walking, the night begins to feel more structured again, not busier, but guided. There's a sense of timing here, like the entire city is gently moving according to something you can't quite see. And then you hear it, a bell. Not the curfew bell from earlier. This one is softer, more regular. It doesn't demand attention so much as invite it. A calm, steady tone drifting through the air, marking something invisible yet deeply understood. You follow the sound without really deciding to, your steps aligning with its rhythm. The street opens slightly, and ahead you see the outline of a church tower, rising calmly into the night sky. Another bell rings, and then another, each one spaced just enough to feel intentional. Historians widely agree that in medieval Europe, church bells played a central role in organizing daily life. Without modern clocks, these bells marked the passage of time, calling people to prayer, signaling work hours, announcing important moments throughout the day. Time wasn't something you checked, it was something you listened for. You pause, looking up at the tower, its edges softened by darkness. A faint glow spills from a narrow window near the top where someone unseen keeps track of the hours. Or at least, keeps track of the bells. There's something quietly comforting about that. No notifications, no alarms blaring from your pocket, just a shared understanding carried through sound. One lesser-known detail is that different bells often signaled different things. A certain pattern might mean morning prayer, another might mark midday, yet another could signal the end of the workday. It's like an early version of a daily schedule, but far more poetic. You imagine trying to set your modern calendar this way, meeting at 3 soft bells and 1 slightly enthusiastic one. It has a certain charm, though it might confuse your co-workers. You smile faintly and continue walking, the bell's echo fading gently behind you. And yet, something stays with you, because even now, your life still follows structured time. Work hours, breaks, even the concept of weekends, distinct blocks of time shaped by long-standing traditions, many of which trace back to religious rhythms like these. Historians still debate how precisely people measured time in everyday medieval life. While bells provided general structure, exact minutes weren't always important. Life moved in broader, softer segments: morning, midday, evening, not 7:42 p.m., which, honestly, sounds a bit more relaxing. You pass a small doorway where a candle burns quietly inside. A figure kneels in stillness, head bowed, completely at ease within the rhythm of the moment. No hurry, no pressure to move on to the next thing, just presence. You slow your pace instinctively, your footsteps softening even further, as if you don't want to disturb the calm. And it occurs to you that time here isn't something to chase, it's something to move with. A subtle difference, but a meaningful one. You glance once more toward the tower, now partially hidden as you continue along the street. The bells have stopped for now, leaving behind a gentle silence that feels earned, like a pause in a conversation. You take a slow breath, the cool night air filling your lungs, and feel your own rhythm begin to match the world around you. slower, steadier, less concerned with exactness and more aware of flow. Because even in your own life, with all its precise schedules and digital clocks, there are still moments shaped by shared timing. Lunch breaks, evenings, the quiet understanding of when the day begins and when it gently comes to an end. You walk on, the memory of the bells echoing softly in your mind, and as you move forward, you carry with you a quiet realization that time has always been there, not just measured, but felt. You continue along the softly lit street, the echo of the bells still lingering somewhere in your thoughts when the city begins to thin out just a little. The buildings grow more spaced apart, the air slightly cooler, carrying with it a faint scent of earth and damp wood. There's a gate ahead. Not large or imposing, just solid. Wood reinforced with iron bands, standing quietly as a boundary between one space and another. A lantern hangs nearby, casting a steady glow over a small wooden table where a man sits, wrapped in a teal cloak, half awake but very much present. He looks up as you approach, not suspicious, just attentive. This is where movement is noticed. Historians widely agree that travel in the medieval world was often regulated, especially when entering or leaving towns. Gates like this weren't just for defense, they were checkpoints. Places where travelers might be asked questions, required to explain their purpose or in some cases show permission to pass. Not exactly a passport office, but close enough. You slow your steps, observing how another traveller approaches from the opposite direction. They pause, exchange a few quiet words with the gatekeeper, and then continue through without much fuss. Routine. Expected. You can almost hear the conversation. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Nothing dramatic, just a gentle acknowledgement that movement has structure. One lesser-known detail is that certain regions issued forms of travel documents or letters of safe conduct. These weren't standardized like modern passports, but they served a similar purpose. Proof that you had a reason to be on the road, and ideally, that you weren't planning anything inconvenient, like causing trouble or forgetting to pay a toll. You imagine trying to explain your own travels here. I'm just exploring. That might earn you a polite nod, or a slightly longer conversation than you were hoping for. Historians still debate how consistently these travel controls were enforced. In some areas, especially during times of unrest or disease, restrictions were tighter. In others, movement may have been more fluid, depending on local customs and resources. But the idea remains: movement with awareness. You step closer to the gate, the wood worn smooth in places where countless hands have passed over it. The iron fittings catch the lantern light, small golden glints that feel almost decorative in their quiet strength. The gatekeeper shifts slightly, adjusting his posture, and for a moment your eyes meet. There's no urgency in his gaze, no pressure, just a quiet understanding. You're here. You're seen. You can pass. You move through the gate slowly, the space beyond opening into a darker, more open path. The sounds of the town soften behind you, replaced by the gentle hush of the night beyond its walls. And yet something stays with you. Because even now, travel still carries echoes of this system. Airports, checkpoints, identification. The simple act of moving from one place to another often comes with small pauses, moments where your presence is acknowledged and recorded, not always noticed, but always there. You take a few more steps, feeling the shift from structured town life to something quieter, less defined. The road ahead stretches gently into the distance, its edges fading into shadow, and you realize something subtle. These rules weren't just about restriction. They were about connection, about knowing who was coming and going, about maintaining a sense of order in a world where information didn't travel as quickly as people did. A quiet way of keeping track. You glance back once more at the gate, now just a silhouette against the soft glow of the town behind it. The lantern flickers gently, steady and patient, like it has all the time in the world. You turn forward again, continuing along the path, your steps slow and even. And as you walk, you carry with you a quiet awareness that every journey, even now, still begins with a question and a moment of being seen. You move a little farther beyond the gate, the quiet of the open road settling gently around you when something begins to take shape along the edges of your path. At first it's subtle, just a low wooden line running parallel to the road. Then another, Then small patches of land carefully divided, each one marked with intention. Fences. Not tall, not dramatic, just enough to say, this belongs here. You slow your steps, noticing how each section of land feels quietly claimed. A small garden enclosed with woven branches. A patch of soil turned neatly, ready for planting. A few animals resting behind a simple barrier, content and undisturbed. Nothing excessive, but very clear. Historians widely agree that property boundaries in the medieval world were carefully defined, even if they didn't always look the way you might expect. Fences, hedges, ditches, even stones placed at intervals, all served as markers of ownership. You glance down at a line of small rocks set deliberately into the ground. It's almost easy to miss, but once you see it, it becomes obvious. A boundary. You imagine someone placing each stone with quiet care, perhaps double-checking the alignment, making sure it was just right. Not too far, not too close. Because getting it wrong might lead to conversations, long ones. One lesser-known detail is that disputes over land boundaries were surprisingly common. Without modern surveying tools, people relied on memory, local agreements, and visible markers. And sometimes those markers moved. Accidentally, of course. You can almost picture someone nudging a stone just slightly and then walking away very casually, hoping no one noticed. Oh, has that always been there? I thought so. Some things truly never change. You continue walking, and now the landscape feels more organized than it first appeared. Each section of land tells a quiet story. Who tends it, who uses it, who depends on it. And that sense of ownership feels familiar. Because even now, property lines exist everywhere, though often invisible. Legal descriptions, maps, documents. You don't always see the boundary, but you trust that it's there. Mostly. Historians still debate how precise these medieval boundaries were in practice. Some areas had detailed records and agreements, while others relied more on tradition and shared understanding. Which, to be honest, leaves a bit of room for interpretation. You pause near a small wooden fence where a few chickens wander lazily inside. One of them glances at you, tilting its head as if assessing your intentions. You remain still, respecting the boundary, both theirs and yours. There's something quietly respectful about it. Not just taking what isn't yours, not crossing lines without reason. A simple rule, but a meaningful one. You step back onto the path, continuing forward as the fences gradually thin out, giving way to more open space. The night air feels wider here, less contained, but the idea stays with you. Boundaries, not always visible, not always spoken, but understood. You take a slow breath, the cool air settling in your chest, and realize something subtle. These rules weren't just about ownership, they were about clarity, about knowing where one thing ends and another begins. And even now, in your own world of property lines and personal space and quiet expectations, you still navigate these invisible edges every day. Sometimes carefully, sometimes without even noticing. You walk on, the last of the fences fading behind you, the path stretching gently ahead, and as you move forward you carry with you a quiet understanding that not all boundaries are meant to stop you. Some are simply there to help you know where you stand. You follow the path a little farther, the open space around you stretching into a quiet, gentle landscape, when the soft glow of light appears ahead again, this time warmer, steadier, and closer to the ground. Not lanterns on posts, but windows, several of them. A home. Larger than the others you've seen so far, its wooden beams dark against the night, its interior softly alive with movement. There's a low murmur of voices, the faint clink of cups, the subtle rhythm of people gathered in one place. You step closer, not intruding, just observing from the edge of the doorway where the light spills outward. Inside, a small group is seated together. Their clothing is modest but carefully arranged, indigo, russet, soft saffron tones catching the firelight. A table sits between them, simple but clearly important, holding bread, a pitcher, a few shared dishes. There's something ceremonial about it. Not formal exactly, but intentional. You're witnessing something shaped by rules again, this time quieter ones. Marriage. Historians widely agree that marriage in the medieval world was not just a personal decision. It was a legal and social contract, often involving families, property, and long-term stability. Love may have been present, of course, but structure was never far behind. You watch as two figures sit slightly closer together than the others, their posture calm, attentive. There's no dramatic gesture, no grand declaration, just a shared stillness, as if something has already been agreed upon. Understood. One lesser-known detail is that in many regions, a marriage could be considered valid simply through mutual consent, spoken words exchanged between two people, often in front of witnesses. No elaborate ceremony required, which feels surprisingly efficient. You imagine modern weddings adopting that approach. Do you both agree? Yes. All right then, congratulations. It would certainly shorten the schedule, though perhaps not the guest list. A quiet smile crosses your face as you shift your weight slightly, careful not to disturb the moment. Because what you're seeing isn't just a gathering, it's an agreement taking shape, families involved, expectations forming, roles beginning to settle into place, and yet it doesn't feel heavy. It feels steady. Historians still debate how much personal choice individuals had in these arrangements, especially depending on social class and region. Some marriages were carefully negotiated by families, while others allowed more room for individual preference. A balance. Like so many things you've seen tonight. You glance toward the back of the room, where a small chest rests against the wall, closed but clearly significant. Perhaps holding items tied to the agreement, gifts, goods, or something representing shared responsibility. Because marriage here wasn't just about two people, it was about everything around them. Property, family ties, future stability. You notice a woman gently adjusting the edge of the tablecloth, smoothing it with quiet care. It's such a small gesture, but it carries meaning, an attention to detail, a desire for order, for harmony. And again, it feels familiar. Because even now, marriage still carries echoes of these structures. Legal documents, shared responsibilities, expectations that extend beyond the individuals involved. You don't always think about them, but they're there. You step back slightly, allowing the warmth of the room to remain undisturbed behind you. The voices soften, blending into a quiet background hum as you return to the night air. And as you walk away, you carry with you a gentle realization that even the most personal moments have always been shaped by quiet rules. Not always visible, not always spoken aloud, but present, guiding, holding things together in ways that feel both structured and softly human. You leave the warm glow of the house behind, the quiet murmur of voices fading into the night, and as you continue along the path, the air shifts again, slightly cooler, a little more open, with a sense of order returning in a different form. Ahead you notice a small gathering near a wooden post set into the ground. A lantern hangs beside it, casting a steady circle of light. A few figures stand nearby, not tense, not alarmed, just present, as if attending to something routine. You slow your steps, curious. At the center of the space, a man speaks softly to another, gesturing toward a small pouch of coins. There's no raised voice, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet exchange, a resolution. Historians widely agree that medieval justice systems often relied on fines as a common form of punishment, especially for minor offenses. Rather than harsh or physical consequences in every case, many situations were settled through payment, structured, recorded, and ideally, fair. You watch as the coins are counted carefully, placed into another hand with deliberate precision. No rush, no resistance, just completion. It feels almost administrative. One lesser-known detail is that many offences had established fines, sometimes listed in local codes. Different actions carried different costs, creating a kind of early pricing system for behaviour, which is a slightly strange thought. You imagine a list somewhere, minor disturbance, this many coins. Breaking something, a few more. Being slightly annoying, still under review. Somewhere, someone probably tried to argue for a discount. You can almost hear it now. Historians still debate how consistent these systems were across regions. In some areas, fines were carefully standardized. In others, local officials had more flexibility, adjusting outcomes based on circumstance, status, or community expectations. A mix of structure and interpretation. You shift your gaze slightly, noticing how calm everyone appears. No urgency, no lingering tension. Once the exchange is complete, the people begin to disperse, returning quietly to whatever they were doing before. The moment ends as gently as it began, and that feels important. Because the goal here isn't spectacle, it's resolution. You take a step closer to the wooden post, noticing faint markings carved into its surface. Not decorative exactly, but purposeful. Perhaps records, perhaps reminders. A place where rules become visible, even if only briefly, and it reminds you of something. Even now, many systems of law rely on fines, traffic violations, small infractions, administrative penalties. The scale and context have changed, of course, but the idea remains familiar. A structured response, a way to restore balance, without disruption. You glance back at the space where the exchange took place, now nearly empty, the lantern still glowing softly as if nothing unusual had happened, and in a way, nothing has. Just a rule being followed, a consequence being acknowledged, a system quietly doing its work. You take a slow breath, the cool air settling gently around you, and continue walking. And as you move forward, you carry with you a subtle understanding that not all rules are meant to punish. Some are simply there to keep things even. You move on from the quiet exchange, the soft clink of coins fading into memory, and the night begins to shift again, this time guided by a different kind of rhythm, a warmer one, a gentler one. The faint scent of something cooking drifts toward you, steady and inviting, like a quiet promise that someone, somewhere, is still preparing a simple meal. You follow it naturally. The path bends slightly, leading you to a small open front space where a low fire glows beneath a clay pot. A figure stands nearby, stirring slowly with a wooden ladle. The movement is unhurried, almost meditative. Steam rises in soft curls. You pause at the edge, watching, because this too is governed by rules. Historians widely agree that medieval towns had various forms of food regulation, especially in larger settlements. Markets, as you saw earlier, were controlled, but so were the preparation and sale of food. Bakers, brewers, and cooks often had to follow specific standards to ensure consistency and safety. Not exactly a modern kitchen inspection, but not entirely different either. You glance at the pot, wondering what's inside. Perhaps a simple stew, lentils, herbs, maybe a bit of meat if the day had been kind. The ingredients are modest, but the care is clear, measured, intentional. One lesser-known detail is that in some cities there were officials assigned to check the quality of food being sold. Bread again was a particular focus, but so were other staples. Ensuring that what people ate was safe, or at least acceptable, was considered important for the well-being of the community. Which makes sense, because food, after all, is something everyone depends on. You imagine someone carefully inspecting a loaf, nodding thoughtfully and saying, "Yes, this seems like proper bread." A surprisingly reassuring sentence. You shift your weight slightly as the cook ladles a portion into a small wooden bowl, handing it to another figure who waits patiently nearby. There's no rush, no crowd pressing in, just a quiet exchange. You take in the scene, the firelight flickering against the wall, the soft glow reflecting off clay surfaces, the gentle movement of hands performing familiar tasks, and it feels steady. Historians still debate how consistent food safety practices were across different regions and time periods. Some towns enforced strict guidelines, while others relied more on reputation and trust, which, honestly, still happens today. You think about the places you choose to eat, the quiet confidence you place in certain kitchens, the small hesitations you might feel in others. That instinct has a long history. You glance at the ingredients laid out nearby, bundles of herbs tied with twine, a small sack of grain, a jug of liquid catching the light. Everything simple, everything known. There's comfort in that. You watch as the cook tastes a small spoonful, pauses, then adds something, just a pinch, before stirring again. A quiet adjustment, a final touch. Because even within rules, there's room for judgment, for experience, for a bit of personal instinct. You can't help but smile slightly. Somewhere, someone is still perfecting their recipe. You step back, letting the warmth of the fire settle into the background as you return to the path. The scent lingers for a moment longer, then fades gently into the night. And as you walk on, you carry with you a quiet realization that even now, in your world of menus and labels and quiet expectations about what food should be, you're still part of this same system, just with a few more choices. And perhaps slightly more seasoning. You leave the gentle warmth of the cooking fire behind, the scent of herbs and slow-simmered stew fading into the night, and as you continue walking, the path begins to feel different again, quieter, but not empty. There's a faint glow ahead, higher this time, not from windows or lanterns at eye level, but from something raised above the street. Small points of light, spaced unevenly, casting soft halos onto the ground below. You step closer, torches. Fixed to wooden brackets along the wall, their flames steady but gentle, moving just enough to keep the shadows alive. They don't flood the street with light, they simply guide it. You slow your pace, noticing how each flame illuminates just a small portion of the path, leaving the rest in comfortable darkness. It's not about brightness, it's about visibility. Historians widely agree that as medieval towns grew, some began implementing forms of street lighting. Simple, often community-maintained systems designed to make nighttime movement safer. Not every street had them, and they weren't always consistent, but where they existed, they made a difference. You step into one pool of light, then another, your shadow stretching and shrinking as you move. There's something almost rhythmic about it. Light, dark, light again. One lesser-known detail is that in some places, residents were responsible for maintaining lights outside their homes, hanging lanterns or ensuring torches remained lit during certain hours, which means someone, somewhere, probably forgot, and someone else definitely noticed. You can almost hear it. Your torch went out again. I thought it was your turn. A conversation as old as shared responsibility itself. Historians still debate how widespread these lighting practices were and how effective they truly made cities at night. Some areas remained quite dark, while others developed more reliable systems over time. But the intention was there. Safety, guidance, a way to move through darkness without feeling completely lost. You glance down the street, noticing how the light subtly shapes behavior. People walk within its reach, staying close to the illuminated edges, naturally avoiding the deeper shadows. Not out of fear, just preference. And that feels familiar, because even now modern cities are designed with lighting in mind. Street lamps, porch lights, glowing signs, all quietly working to create a sense of comfort and visibility. You don't always think about it, but you notice when it's missing. You pause beneath one of the torches, looking up as the flame flickers softly, its glow catching on the metal bracket that holds it in place. The craftsmanship is simple, functional, but there's care in its design. It's meant to last, to serve a purpose, and to do so quietly. You take a slow breath, the air here slightly warmer from the flame, and feel a subtle sense of reassurance settle in. Because even in darkness, there are systems in place to help you see. You step forward again, moving from one circle of light to the next, your pace steady, your path clear. And as you walk, you carry with you a quiet understanding that not all rules are loud. Some simply glow, just enough to guide you home. You move gently from one pool of torchlight to the next, the quiet glow guiding your steps when the street begins to widen again, not into a market this time, but into something calmer, more deliberate. There's a table set near the edge of the road, not for food, not for trade, for writing. A single candle burns steadily beside it, its flame small but unwavering, casting light over a spread of parchment, an ink pot and a feather quill resting carefully across the page. A figure sits there, slightly hunched, their attention fixed on the slow, careful act of recording something line by line. You pause, because this feels different, more permanent. Historians widely agree that medieval societies developed increasingly organized systems of taxation and record-keeping. Land ownership, goods, obligations, all of it needed to be tracked in some way, even if that way was a careful hand and a lot of patience. You watch as the quill moves again, leaving thin, dark lines that settle into the parchment, like quiet decisions made visible. No rushing, no scribbling, every mark intentional. One lesser-known detail is that many of these records were maintained locally, often by scribes who held significant responsibility within their communities. Accuracy mattered, clarity mattered, because once something was written down, it stayed. You imagine the quiet pressure of that responsibility. No delete key, no quick edits, just a deep breath, a steady hand, and the hope that you got it right the first time. You might double-check your spelling a little more carefully under those conditions. The scribe pauses, lifting the quill slightly, then glances at a small set of wooden tokens beside the parchment, perhaps used to track counts or confirm entries. There's a system here, simple but effective. Historians still debate how standardized these record-keeping practices were across different regions. Some areas developed detailed systems with surprising complexity, while others relied more on memory and local agreement. But the intention was always the same. to remember, to account for what exists, what is owed, what belongs where. You shift your weight slightly, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot barely noticeable, and the scribe looks up for just a moment, not startled, just aware. You're seen, not as a disruption, just as part of the space. Then they return to their work, and that quiet focus feels familiar, because even now your world runs on records, digital or otherwise, accounts, balances, logs, entries, all quietly shaping the structure of everyday life. You don't always see them, but they're there, keeping track. You glance at the parchment again, noticing how the lines form patterns, names, numbers, perhaps small symbols indicating something more specific. It's not just writing, it's organization, it's memory, made visible. You take a slow breath, the scent of ink and parchment faint but present, and feel a sense of stillness settle around you, because this is a different kind of rule, not one that tells you what to do in the moment, but one that remembers what has already been done. A quiet record, a gentle form of accountability. You step back slightly, allowing the candlelight to remain undisturbed, and continue walking as the table fades into the soft darkness behind you. And as you move forward, you carry with you a subtle realization that even now, in your own world of accounts and entries and quiet digital traces, you're still part of this same story, just written in a different kind of ink. You move on from the quiet room of learning, the soft rhythm of voices and careful repetition fading behind you, and the night opens up once more. The path stretches gently ahead, no longer guided by walls or fences or even torches, just a wide open space under a calm sky. There's no single place drawing you forward now. Just the feeling of continuing. The air is still, carrying that faint blend of everything you've passed through tonight. Wood smoke, damp stone, distant bread, a trace of ink, a memory of firelight. It all lingers, layered together, like the rules you've been quietly collecting along the way. You walk slowly, your steps soft against the earth, and begin to notice something different. There are no more obvious signs, no gates, no tables, no voices reminding you what to do. And yet you still move in a certain way, a little quieter, a little more aware, as if the rules have settled somewhere inside you. Historians widely agree that many of the structures formed during the medieval period didn't simply disappear. They evolved, softened, adapted into forms that still guide modern life. Not always visibly, not always consciously, but consistently. You pause, looking out across the open space, where the faint outline of the town now sits behind you. From here it looks smaller, simpler, just a collection of shapes resting quietly under the night. And yet, everything you experience there still matters. Curfews that became routines, guilds that became professions, clothing rules that became dress codes, markets that became systems of trust, hygiene practices that became daily habits, bells that became schedules, gates that became checkpoints, boundaries that became property lines, marriages that became legal frameworks, fines that became regulations, food rules that became safety standards, lights that became guidance, records that became systems, learning that became education, each one a small thread, woven together. You take a slow breath, letting it settle fully, and feel a quiet sense of connection, not overwhelming, not dramatic, just present. Because the realization isn't loud, it doesn't need to be. It's simple. You've been following these rules all along, not because you had to, but because they've become part of how the world works, part of how you move through it, part of how you understand it. Historians still debate exactly how these transitions happened, how certain practices endured while others faded, how some rules reshaped themselves while others remained almost unchanged. There's no single answer, no clean line from then to now, just a slow process, a quiet continuation. You begin to walk again, your pace unhurried, your steps steady, the path beneath you feeling softer now, less defined. And as you move, the details of the night begin to blur slightly, not disappearing, just easing. The edges of things soften, the sounds grow quieter. Even your thoughts seem to stretch out a little longer, a little slower. You pass by a faint glow in the distance, not stopping this time, just letting it remain part of the landscape. There's nothing left to examine, nothing left to figure out, only the feeling, that gentle understanding that rules don't always arrive as commands. Sometimes they arrive as habits, as patterns, as quiet expectations you don't even notice anymore. You take another slow breath, deeper this time, and let it out just as slowly. The air is calm, the night is steady, and everything feels settled. There's no need to hurry forward, no need to turn back. You're exactly where you need to be. And as the path stretches softly ahead and the world around you becomes a little more distant, a little more dreamlike, you let your steps slow even further, almost to stillness, almost to rest. Because the journey doesn't need to end with a conclusion. It can simply fade, like the echo of a bell, like the last flicker of a torch, like a rule you've followed so long, you no longer remember when you first learned it. Your breathing softens, your shoulders relax, and the quiet of the night gently wraps around you, holding everything in place without effort. Nothing urgent, nothing demanding, just a calm, steady presence. And in that stillness you drift a little further into rest, into quiet, into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams. You leave the quiet scratch of quill on parchment behind, the memory of careful records lingering like faint ink on your thoughts, and the path begins to soften again. The night feels gentler here, less structured, as if the rules themselves are becoming quieter, more familiar. Ahead you notice a small building with a low roof and narrow windows, a warm glow slipping out from within. It's not grand like a church, not busy like a market, just steady, lived in, quietly important. You step closer. Inside, a handful of figures sit at long wooden benches. Some are speaking softly, others simply listening. At the front of the room, a person stands beside a simple board, gesturing slowly, explaining something with patient repetition. You've arrived somewhere unexpected, a place of learning. Historians widely agree that medieval education, though limited compared to today, followed structured rules and traditions, especially in cathedral schools and early universities. Lessons were often based on repetition, memorization, and spoken instruction, with clear expectations about discipline and behavior. You linger near the doorway, watching as a young student carefully traces lines onto a small wax tablet, their movements hesitant but focused. Nearby, another repeats a phrase under their breath, quietly practicing until it feels right. There's no rush here, just persistence. One lesser-known detail is that many students learn through oral recitation, listening, repeating, memorizing. Books were rare and valuable, so knowledge often lived in the mind as much as on the page, which honestly sounds impressive. You try to imagine memorizing everything instead of just looking it up. It's a bit humbling and slightly exhausting. The teacher pauses, nods gently, and corrects something with a soft gesture. No harsh tone, no urgency, just guidance, a steady shaping of understanding over time. Historians still debate how accessible education truly was in the medieval world. For some, especially those connected to religious institutions, opportunities existed. For others, learning remained informal, passed through family or craft rather than structured schooling. But the idea was there. Learning with rules. You notice how the students sit in a certain way, how they wait before speaking, how they follow an unspoken rhythm of listening and responding. It's not enforced loudly, but it's clearly understood, and again it feels familiar. Because even now, education still carries these echoes, classrooms, schedules, expectations about attention and participation. You may have more resources now, more access, more flexibility, but the structure remains. You step back slightly, allowing the quiet focus of the room to continue uninterrupted. The soft murmur of voices blends into a gentle background hum, steady and calming, and you realize something subtle. These rules weren't just about knowledge, they were about passing something forward, carefully, deliberately, from one person to another. You take a slow breath, the warmth from the room fading as you return to the cooler night air and continue walking. The path ahead is dim now, the buildings fewer, the space more open. And as you move forward, you carry with you a quiet awareness that even now, in your own moments of learning, of listening, of slowly understanding something new, you're still sitting in that room, just with a different kind of light, and perhaps a slightly more comfortable chair.